This is Awake In from Counseling in Schools, where we share our voice on the potential and possibilities, challenges, and celebrations of children, families, and staff in New York City schools. Awake In is conversations about commitment to the emotional and social growth of children so they can thrive in school and succeed in life. Welcome in.
Welcome back, everyone, to Awaken. This is your host, Kat Potts, and today I am joined again by Mr. Kevin Dahill-Fuchel, Executive Director and Licensed Clinical Social Worker at Counseling in Schools. Hey, Kevin, how are you?
Great, Kat. Good to hear from you. Nice to see you.
Yes, love our conversations. And we're also joined by Miss Shana Bennett, Social Worker Supervisor at PSIS 171. Hey, Shana.
Hi.
I've really been looking forward to this conversation. And today, everyone, we're really going to be talking about navigating safety concerns in a school environment for students, the impact on students, the impact on teachers, as well as just kind of the sort of nuances that happen when you have students coming from households with different views on what does safety look like, right? So we may have these sort of state mandated rules, right? But then you might have some students show up and they feel a little bit differently. So, what does that kind of look like? What are you all seeing?
Well, I think just to your point, we are seeing the range of experiences that people have, and we're seeing not just within the student body and within the families, but also within, the staff who work in schools. And there's certainly a heavy emphasis on compliance with the protocols. But I think, as you might imagine, that kind of compliance doesn't necessarily mean that people are fully bought in and even feeling like those protocols are optimally protecting them or are the right ways to protect them. It's a field to navigate for everyone in the school community. Like I said, I think from the children up through the staff, where there's just a lot of need for communication and conversation to come to sort of common understandings. And I think, at Counseling in Schools, that really is what we want to do on any number of issues. This one feels, like it becomes very personal and sort of private almost how you feel about this. So, I wonder, I know Shana Bennett, one of our supervisors in a school and working with Counseling in Schools for many years in this elementary to middle school. Shana, I imagine you really see this quite a bit.
Yes, I definitely see a mixture of feelings and experiences. I see definitely a lot of fear. I see some anxiety for sure. So today is actually the first day here in New York that public schools can, the mandate is lifted. So folks can not wear a mask if needed. And even I saw some parents a little bit nervous because they wanted to give their kids the freedom of not or choosing to not wear their mask, but also nervous about what that would mean. And others were like, they are not okay with their kid keeping their mask off and they want them to keep it on. Others who are just like, finally. So I think there are a mixture of feelings and experiences. I also see, kids, even in preparation for this change on Friday, they were, some of them were a little bit anxious, particularly the ones that were affected by COVID in different ways and had their own anxieties that arose as a result of, when we were at the height of the pandemic, they developed some pretty severe anxieties. And so there was a lot of fear about what this would mean if people came in with this, with the mask off. So I think another big thing is just the constant shifting, the constant change. We know in our work that stability, some source of consistency is so important in developing trust, particularly with kids. And as we know, in the last 2+ years, there have been such shifts, not just with COVID, but with a variety of things. And so we're seeing how that is impacting the children as well as the kids. So I definitely see a range of feelings. There's so, especially in response to the vaccination, there's just so much going on.
Would you say that in like a classroom setting, are you seeing that impacting how children are learning, right? Because, and at the same time, did you have kids come in that it's like there's so much tension around this mask thing and these safety concerns where it's like you're spending more time possibly like trying to focus on keeping the masks on than you are like teaching them the lesson?
Mm-hmm. I think that people have adjusted. I think at this point in the year, we've gotten into some form of flow. So now kids know, well, now things have changed as of today, but kids kind of know about keeping their mask up. And so there's less of a focus now on the mask part, but more of a focus on getting kids up to their academic level because of that space that we missed for so long. And so I think
that's such a good point you brought up, because Kevin and I in our last conversation were talking a bit about that, where there's a lot of pressure now because you're trying to balance, like these mandates and how are these personal experiences for these kids and these teachers, but then also like now academically, where are they at? I was just talking to a mother yesterday who was telling me that she's like, I barely knew how to, teach my son the math at home. And I'm like, now it's like he's worried about getting sick. Now he's behind in his math class. Like, there's so much of that pressure that it's like, as counselors, it's like, and as a social worker, like, what are some things that we can do? Because even though, we may be in a place now where the pandemic isn't as heavy in terms of like, there's some level of normalcy, there's this sort of like afterglow, I'll call it, where it's like, what do we do now? How do we get these children and kids to a place of comfort and to a place where they're like academically striving? Because there's that too, we can't just like hold a bunch of kids back or make any child feel less than because they may have not had the support at home to teach some things in the way that they needed in order to take a test, for example.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's easy to lose in this sort of feeling of return to normalcy, like I was with some people over the weekend and someone said, man, it feels like is COVID over? And we all just kind of laughed because, no, we know it's not. And for people, for so many of our students in our communities, and I don't know, Shana, in the community that you work in, but, the disproportionate number of deaths of family members, the number of children who've lost grandparents or parents or brothers or uncles or cousins is just, I think we're still just kind of like grappling with that. So, I think to say that, well, because we can take off a mask, we're ready to now focus on the math, like misses the fact that, just to Shana's point, that student taking off the mask is worried because someone in their family died because of this disease. And they were told for the last 2 years that this mask is what you can do to sort of help protect you and your family. And now they're going to sort of think, well, what's really like, am I still doing this? Do I not do that? And now I also am dealing with my grief and my loss and my family's reconstitution or however it's come together. So I think that the path forward really is going even more deeply into the emotional wellness, social skill development. This might be a little controversial to say, but it might lead us more towards a little bit of social promotion. I think we can catch up intellectually at some point. Like I'll just use as another little bit digressed example, right? Like, I'm of a certain age. I didn't get to like algebra and that kind of stuff until I was in high school. Kids are learning that stuff in like 7th and 8th grade, right? I did okay learning it in high school. I think we can kind of push it off a little bit. You don't have to get to the Pythagorean theorem where you're maybe 16 years old if you didn't get it when you were 10.
True.
But I don't think you can really catch up that much if you feel like the world is a scary place and you don't know if anyone's there to protect you and people are dying and you don't know what to do and you're feeling desperate. Like that's going to have an impact that's going to be really hard to recover. That I'd really rather spend our focus and time on now and help kids move forward socially through different grades. And then knowing that I'm not saying ignore the rest, but just don't make that like, that now we have to go back and do all of that. Like that really concerns me.
Yeah, and I think that's fair because you gave me the chills, Kevin, when you brought up the fact that taking off that mask could really trigger trauma for somebody. So now it's like we can't ignore what that reaction could be for someone, and then what are the potential reactions of people around them. I've been in stores and places where people are very blunt and upfront about somebody wearing a mask, very vocal and sort of ostracizing people sometimes for wanting to protect themselves. And I can't even imagine what that could look like in a school setting, to your point, where you're triggered by that trauma. And no, we can't just go learn how to do algebra now, because how is that kid going to even focus on anything when they are trying to balance emotions that are a lot for kids, I would assume, as a social worker and as a counselor. I mean, that's a lot of, even as an adult, we're still trying to learn how to navigate our own emotions, but now we're expecting that of a child.
Yeah, I think something that is important, because I love what Kevin said, and I am with you, Kevin, on how we should move forward. Obviously, it's a little biased there, but I do think that where the challenge comes into play is getting the schools to buy into that, because I do think that, we're all on different, we come from a social work perspective and from a mental health perspective, whereas they're trying to push these academics, get them on a particular academic level, now we have these state tests that are coming up. And I think that it's crucial for us all to be on the same page in terms of overall, what's that priority? What comes first, the chicken or the egg? So we can get someone on an academic level, but if they're not socially and emotionally ready to function in a world that has so much going on, they can be academically on level, but if they're socially and emotionally behind, that could set them up for some big trouble. So I think if we could all be on the same page in terms of how we support and what are we really pushing, I think that would help us to all work together to support these kids on a higher level.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, Shana. And I think the challenge, as always, is to sort of not be and I kind of went there, I think, a little bit, not be so much all or nothing, right? Like, as you were speaking, I was thinking about, there are some children who, in the context of COVID and everything else, sort of accelerated their focus on learning, or moved away from the emotional for reasons that, might have been overwhelming. And they were able to, find comfort in reading or in other types of pursuits that would align them to be more successfully academically. So you wouldn't want to take that away. You'd want to acknowledge that. You want to use sort of, the academic pursuits as a part of the healing process, not as counter to the healing process. And also understand then that those students who may not do any of that, like that's why I guess where my heart goes first, because I feel like, someone gets labeled a failure in something and they just like hang that on their neck on top of everything else, and death and loss and stuff. Like, that's just such a hard yoke to ever remove. But I don't think we need to go all or nothing. I think we can pay attention to those students, but it's not just, it's the focus of the system, and it's also continuing to try to say, like, let's keep a balanced perspective. Let's not rush all the way into one thing or another only. And somehow I think it's our job, because this part of the work, or this part of growing up, has been kind of devalued in schools for so long. Right now it's valued. And so what we don't want to do is just have it kind of completely get lost. So I think we have to raise our voices to keep it present without like trying to make it a battle, right? Without battling against the academic piece, but just making sure we don't sort of lose that legitimacy or the real need that's there.
And it makes me think too, like, what role can the parents play? I mean, of course, there's those controversies that are coming from different households, but what what are some things that you all think that parents could do to kind of stay neutral in a way? Because that's, like, we've talked a little bit about it, that's kind of hard for a student too, because even if, counselors and the school from an academic standpoint are coming together, right? It's like now they have this third party that could be saying something completely different. So I feel like there's a lot of opportunity there for parents. And what I wonder too, what could that look like for everybody to kind of come together? And what could is that like sort of like school town halls? Like, what are some ways that everybody could kind of like get on the same page about this, where no one feels like they're trying to push their own political agenda, personal agenda? Because there's that too, right? The traumas that people are not just the kids are experiencing, but their parents, and how that projects onto them.
Yeah, I mean, I think, setting up those kinds of, I would call it community conversations,
right?
And they can happen in schools, but you might also think about them happening not in schools. Like one of the things I think is sometimes not considered quite the way I would think it could be effective. Let's say a school sponsors a community meeting in an outside environment. So let's say the community of PSIS 171 goes to a community center to sponsor a conversation. So you take it out of the school building, which when you do that, you kind of relieve people of the sort of the dominance of city, the city hierarchy that many people feel like they need to push against, versus having a conversation where it is so complicated. There's so many different points of view. And if you set it up in a way that people just know their voices are going to be heard without there being one dominant player, at least the process, I mean, it would be more than one town hall, more than one community conversation.
Right.
But at least it could, take some shape. I mean, I don't know what you think. Have anything like that happened at PSIS 171, Shana?
I think that they do such a great job with making sure that parent voices are heard as well as student voices. I think one thing that they do well as well is like they create, I believe it's like monthly conversations where the parents can get involved, and we also have a wellness team meeting that the parents are on, so that it's not, we are not defining wellness based off of just staff perspective, but that the parent and the children, and actually student council is on that wellness team meeting as well. I think that is super important because you have different stakeholders within the community on one team deciding what wellness looks like for the community at large. And we know that wellness, there are like 7 or 8 dimensions of wellness. So wellness is not just about social emotional. So how can we look at it and work to fully support the fullness of what wellness looks like? I think another thing that is important that we incorporate, CIS incorporated within the community, we did we did basically a survey to understand where our families are as well as our staff, mental health wise. So what's going on for them and how can we as a community support them? I think that that's another thing, so that we can generate some stats that say, actually, this is where folks are, and this is actually what they need, compared to this way we're not necessarily assuming, but people are telling us where they are, what they need, and how we can move forward and support. So I believe that that's another way to move forward.
That's great.
Wow, yeah, that's really interesting too, because that could, defining wellness, right? That can look different for different schools in different places, you know what I mean? Because a lot of times, I think more recently in the past, probably 5 to 10 years, there's been more emphasis on how wellness looks different for everybody, every individual. But if we can kind of measure that like by school, by community, then we can almost customize what does that plan look like? Because I think sometimes people do have sort of pushback on this like one size fits all kind of approach. And that's where people can feel like, oh, it's a little bit biased, or, that's just what they think over there. We don't align with that, because the experiences in different areas, and different backgrounds that people come from will impact what'll work for them and what'll work for their students. So it'd be very interesting to see what that would look like, doing something like that on like a broader level, the surveying, and sort of being able to look at those measurements and make the decisions based on that, rather than sort of the assumption. And that probably, to your point earlier, Kevin, would help everybody kind of get on the same page and meet in the middle. So there's like less tension of, trying to get everybody to the same academic level and leaving behind the emotional, or vice versa.
Right. And every school community is certainly different. And I think, when you allow those voices in, just as you said, I mean, I think you have, more of an alignment and buy-in to the process, and there isn't one, sort of dominating factor. I mean, I think one of the things that happened in the politicizing of the COVID protocols was there was just a sense that there was a power structure that was imposing something versus a public health sort of consensus that was able to be reached. And, I think on a national level, that's very difficult to think about, but on a small community level, it's not so difficult to think about. And what you did at the school there, Shana, is demonstrates that, right? I mean, ask questions, people give answers, and then you respond accordingly. And that just, people feel, it's not just a feeling, it's that you are a part of coming together with what you're going to do. It's much more, sort of community based.
Right. And accurate too, because you're actually making your decisions based on the feedback that you're getting. And to your point again, Kevin, around the politics part of it, that played such a huge role, where it was almost like people were losing compassion for each other on an emotional level because of the sort of propaganda that was out there. That's really what was driving people to feel one way or do something over the other, versus like, how is this really affecting people just as they are, nothing else. So the opportunity, Shana, that you're creating and that kind of idea, I'd love to be able to see that sort of at other places. And I think that's a great way that counselors can get involved. And what does that look like to be able to kind of set something like that up? And really, honestly, I'd love to continue talking about this idea around wellness looking different for everybody, because like that to me is like a whole nother conversation, especially when we're talking about COVID and just like generally the mental health of children and staff, because that's just like such a facet that people like don't get. They're like, okay, we're going to give them this, we're going to give them a mask, that should make them feel better, we'll give them extra time, we'll put their desks far apart, that'll make them feel better, like as if that's like the streamlined way and works for everybody. So if I had another 20-40 minutes to talk to you both more about that, I definitely would. So I have to have you both back on. But before we kind of close out, are there a couple golden nuggets, one from you, Kevin, and one from you, Shana, like something that you can just kind of recommend to counselors or to schools? Shana, I know you just gave a huge one, but if there's anything else for our audience.
I think for me, the biggest thing that comes up for me in this moment is the power of connection. I really do believe that that's something that was lost a little bit during the pandemic. And I've seen how it has enhanced our students' growth process, even just in the last few months. And so I would just encourage folks, counselors, families, whoever, that to enhance the power of like connection and never underestimate that power of connection. So in whatever way you can get that, I think that would help in a lot of ways. And know that connection does not have to be super complex. It's just in being, like allowing us to just allow our children to be kids, and inspiring any form of connection and conversation. I think that would help to push us forward and to just inspire us to be kinder to each other, to love ourselves and to love others.
Yeah, I mean,
I know, mic drop.
Yeah, I love everything you just said. Shana, I think that's right on the money. And what I was thinking about, was one of our mini mantras inside of Counseling in Schools applies broader, which is sort of never work in isolation. And I think that, we think about that in our work in schools, but I think about that as a parent, like don't isolate myself from other parents. Don't, when I think I'm the only one, realize I'm not the only one. Like, it's not like my situation may be unique and, oh, I've got this and I've got that, but you know what? There are other people who are connected, to your point, to those experiences that we can work it through together, and together it's going to be better than trying to figure it out on my own. So I always want to sort of say to to school communities, like your community, the people in your community are your asset, to be utilized, and speak up and call your school or go to a PTA, or just even go down the hall where you know there's another parent with the child in the same school, and like just have coffee and talk about it. Like, don't keep it in, talk about it, get out of the isolation, make those connections. And I think, there's no easy answers, but that process will lead somewhere that'll be much better than if you try to just go it alone.
Definitely. We're definitely better together. And I think unity is what will help us sort of just elevate on an individual level and as a community. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Shana. This is a really amazing conversation. Again, everybody, my name is Kevin Watts. This is Awaken, brought to you by Counseling in Schools. And I can't wait to have you back, Shana. And Kevin, I'm sure we'll be speaking soon again.
Great.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Thanks for joining us, and a special thanks to our subscribers. Consider becoming one today. Counseling in Schools is able to provide comprehensive services throughout New York City partner schools with your generous donations. Learn more about how you can be part of the journey as we promote healing and inspire hope in children by visiting counselinginschools.org.